Happy Easter, everybody. Great to see you. Welcome to Real Life. I'm so glad that you're with us. Hey, turn to somebody next to you, say Happy Easter, give them a fist bump, tell them they look great, lost some weight, something like that, right? Awesome. Hey, it is so great to have you here, whether you're in the room or you're watching online, or Facebook Live, or you're outside in the freezing cold right now in California. We're so glad you're celebrating Easter with us. Hey, I just want to highlight something that Matt just said and invite you back for the series we're kicking off next week. And if you've ever thought that following Jesus seems weird or mystical or something only somebody else can figure out and you can't, this is the series for you. We're going to make it so simple, so practical, and guide you through what it means to follow Jesus. You can be a spectator and just watch it and kind of say, I'm not sure if I'm in this or not, or you can jump right in with us along the way. And if you've been a follower of Jesus for many, many years, and maybe you're just kind of getting stuck in a rut, you feel a little bored with your faith, all that, this series is going to be so helpful for you. I'm so looking forward to some of our guest teachers, and I had a chance to do a couple of interviews that we filmed that we'll show with you. In fact, in 2 weeks from today, or this weekend, we get to show the interview I did with Brian Welch from the band Korn, and he talks about mercy, and it's just going to be so much fun, and you're going to want to make sure you're here and you bring a friend for that. And so we have a free book we want to put in your hand, which will help you with this subject matter. And so when you leave here today, stop by one of the information centers. We're going to give you a free book that will guide you through this. Join a dinner party around here. You get to meet some people and talk about this. And the next 3 weeks are going to be a lot of fun. So even if you don't live here and you're going back home in a few weeks or a few days, your family's hoping a few days, and you're headed back home, you can still join us online and be part of this series. It's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, now here's what I want to ask you to do right now. This is the crowd participation part. Would you take out that card that you were given on the way in? And some of you have already started filling this out, the connection card side of things. On the other side is a survey. This helps us plan out the next 12 to 18 months around here as far as what we're going to be talking about. And so you might think, you know what? I've got a particular thing I'd love to hear somebody talk about. No one's ever talked about it. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. You know what? You can put that on here. For instance, question number 1, I'd like to hear a message on what the Bible says about. There's a variety of options there, but you can even write one in if you want to. Here's the second one. I'm interested in hearing more about these themes. There's a variety of options there. You can write one in as well. Maybe you want to hear about, what God wants the Lakers to do over the offseason, okay? I've got my own prayer list there. We can all write that down. And then that final question, hang on for that one. We're going to talk about that later. In fact, later on, we're going to give you an opportunity to take a big faith step and be baptized. And some people have already decided to do that. They've already signed up, and they're going to be baptized later on. So far this weekend, in just the past 3 services, we've had over 70 people get baptized at all of our locations. So that's pretty cool. And so we'd love to have you be part of that. You might be watching online and think, yeah, I'd like to get baptized. Listen, drive on in here, and you can do that now or here in a little bit, or you can do that tomorrow morning. We'd love to have you at one of our services for that as well. So hang on to that. We'll talk about that more here in just a little bit. Okay, so let me ask you this question. Have you ever had a moment where somebody confused you with somebody else? Or maybe they said you look like somebody else? I've had that a couple times, and one particular time happened this past summer. My family and I were driving to Missouri, which I know you guys often love those stories because something crazy usually happens. And so we were driving to Missouri, but we decided this time we were going to drive via Mount Rushmore to see Mount Rushmore. Is that on the way? No, it is not. But we went anyway, and we drove all the way up, to Salt Lake City, stayed the night, and then drove the next day clear to Casper, Wyoming. That is a long trek. And we were driving, and there's no cell service. There's nothing to see on the drive. Everybody's angry at each other. Everybody's hungry. We can't find anything to eat because there's nothing up there. Okay? For those that say America's getting too crowded, they've not been to Wyoming, all right? There is nothing up there. There's plenty of room to spread out, and we're driving down this highway. It's getting dark. No one's around, and I'm just praying that Casper, Wyoming actually exists. I booked a hotel there, but I see no evidence of life. I don't know where we are. I'm just driving, right? And finally, I see a little bit of light on the horizon. And then as we get closer, it appears it might just be a town. And then we pull into Casper, Wyoming, and I find the Hampton Inn where I made a reservation. And I pull in there, we get out of the car, nobody's talking to each other, we're all bitter, we're all mad, we walk inside, I go up to the counter, I say, I have a reservation I said, okay. And I give him my driver's license. She looks at the driver's license. She looks at me, looks at the driver's license, and then she says, has anybody ever told you, you look like the guy from Jurassic Park? And in that moment, I thought the whole trip is now worthwhile. I look at my kids, I bring them over, come here. She thinks I look like Chris Pratt. Now, I don't know why this is so funny to you, okay? That's a natural comparison. And she obviously thought that was funny too, because she interrupts me and says, no, not Chris Pratt, Jeff Goldblum. That's who you look like. Thanks so much. Now, no disrespect to Jeff Goldblum, because he might be here or be watching, or you might know him. No disrespect to him. But if I'd rather be compared to Chris Pratt instead of the guy that played The Fly. Okay, so that was kind of the two things. In that moment, and it took like 2 seconds, right? In that moment, I went from really high to really low, really quick. And I think all of us have had those experiences before. I mean, we've all bought a car before that somebody told us was the greatest thing ever, and it has no trouble, and they've had no problems with it, and then you buy it, and the next week it breaks down. Guess what? You got Goldblumed. That's what happened to you right there. Maybe you've had that experience where you bought a house one time and it was a fixer-upper, but hey, they knock it out in an hour on HGTV, so you think this isn't going to be that hard, and so you think we can do this, and you buy the house and it's a money pit. Guess what? You got Goldblumed, right? Some of you have been in a relationship before, maybe even a marriage, and you think, you know what, I didn't get Goldblum, I got T-Rexed in that relationship. It was just destruction, right? And maybe you've had a business opportunity that went bad, or you had an investment opportunity that didn't really pan out the way you wanted it to. Maybe you didn't get the scholarship you thought you were going to get. Or maybe it's even more difficult stuff in your life right now. Maybe you thought you were going to have many more years together, but now your health is in jeopardy. Maybe you thought that your relationship with your kids would always get better, but it just seems to be getting worse. Maybe you look at other people and can't figure out how they were able to, try different things and experiment with drugs and all that and move beyond it, and you're stuck with an addiction. Maybe you look at other people and say, how come your relationship with your parents is so great and mine is so bad? And you walk through these different seasons of life, and maybe you stumble in here this weekend kind of wondering, I don't know if anything can help, but right now I'm kind of in a desert land in my life. I'm kind of stuck in this place wondering, is it going to get any better? Do I just grin and bear it? Is this as good as it's going to get? Well, can I just tell you, this Easter, and maybe you hear nothing else I have to say, but just hear this one thing. God has more for you. God has more for you. And the things that God has for you are not good for God, they're good for you. Most of us tend to think about a connection with God a little bit like a box, like you're either in it or you're out of it. And you look at other people and you just go, well, they're probably in, and they got it all together, and they seem to be great, and their Instagram posts are always perfect, so I'm sure they're in that box. And you look at your life and you think about all the mistakes you've made and the regrets that you have and the poor decisions that you might have had, or maybe just the apathy that you're feeling right now, and you think, I'm not in. But Jesus doesn't really talk about this as an in kind of thing or an out kind of thing. He talks about it more like a pathway, like you're following him on this journey. And sometimes it goes quicker than others. Sometimes you stumble along the way. Sometimes you slow down, but you keep going on that path because the life that God has for you is far greater than you've ever thought of on your own. In fact, for anybody right now that feels like they're just stuck, can I just tell you this Easter, I think God has more for you because Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. Jesus came to make dead people alive. And for anybody who's stuck in the desert of their life right now, God has more for you. So here's what I want to do in the time we have together today. I want to tell you two things. I want to tell you a promise that God has for you. And then I want to give you the proof why I believe it to be true. Here's the promise. And the promise is something that is for you even if you don't think it's possible. You might be looking around thinking, you don't know me. You don't know the stuff I've done. You don't know the thoughts that I think. You don't know the battles that I have. There's no way this promise can be for me. Some of you kind of come into here and you're thinking, yeah, I don't think it's for us because we argued the whole way to church. How bad is that? Guess what? 90% of us did that, right? You argued all the way to church. Or some of you dropped off your kids in children's ministry and you were so frustrated with them, you walked away and tore up the tag. Said, I'm not going back for them. They're on you now, okay? And if you've had those thoughts, A, you're not alone, and B, the promise is still for you. The promise is for all of us, and the promise is told to us by the most unlikely of sources. It comes to us from a guy who was far from Christ, a guy that actually imprisoned and killed Christians. And then he became a follower of Jesus after he saw Jesus after the resurrection. His name was Saul, and his name got changed to Paul, and now we refer to him as the Apostle Paul. And what Paul discovered was when he was baptized into Jesus, something happened to him. It didn't happen instantly. It slowly began to change, and slowly his hatred turned to compassion. Slowly, his frustration with life turned to peace. Slowly, his perfectionism turned to a joy that he'd never known before. Slowly, his apathy and aimlessness turned into an adventure with God he never saw coming. And he says, this kind of transformative thing that kind of comes from the inside out, I figured out what it is. And the promise is for you as well as it was for me. This is what Paul says the promise is. He says, the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. Now that just sounds weird, doesn't it? I mean, what does that even mean? Now we've had experiences where you think the spirit of somebody's come over you, right? You had those moments where you looked at your kids and they're asking you why, and finally you just go, because I said so. The spirit of your mother just inhabited you at that moment. I've done it. I've had that moment because when we're kids, we say, I'll never say that when I'm a parent, and then we do it. That's just the reality. Well, this is far greater than that. This is the very Spirit of God that raised Jesus from the dead. He says, when you're baptized into Jesus, that Spirit takes up residence in your life. Then he continues on. And just as God raised Christ Jesus from the dead, he will give life to your mortal bodies by the same Spirit living within you. Now think about that for a second. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead now could live in you. And his objective in your life is not just to get you into heaven. His objective in your life is to bring heaven into your life and to literally bring life to every part of your life, to your emotions, to your dreams, to your desires, to your marriage, to your family. He wants to bring life into every area of your life. In other words, the resurrection of Jesus gives you the power to close the gap between the life you are living and the life you could live. It's so much more than getting into heaven. In fact, C.S. Lewis, a British novelist, and the guy who wrote Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the Chronicles of Narnia, and all those great, great books, he says, Easter is death working backwards. Something is different. Something is changing. Next week, you're going to get to hear from Bob Goff. And Bob is an unbelievable individual who has lived an incredible life. And he started off as an attorney, and then he became an activist for those that were being oppressed. And then he ended up becoming kind of a counsel for Uganda, and then he's become a best-selling author and a nationally known speaker, and he lives down in San Diego, and we asked, would you come up and share with our people, and it's going to be amazing. But Bob continues to just tell crazy stories of his life, and if you've read any of his books, you know this guy's lived a life unlike any other, and he loves to just have a lot of fun and even play pranks on people, and he tells the story of his teenage son wanting to skydive. And so Bob says, okay, well, I'll take you to skydiving lessons. And for several weeks, he would drop his son off at these skydiving lessons. And then Bob got this crazy idea of, I think I'll take the lessons as well, but not tell him. And so the day came for his son to finally go up in an airplane and to skydive. And Bob had called ahead and told everybody what was going on. And so as he's getting ready to drop his son off, he says, you know what, I think I'll just go with you. And his son said, well, you haven't had any lessons. Let's just give it a try. So I don't think they're going to let you in the plane. And sure enough, they let him on the plane. And his son's just kind of scratching his head and going, I can't believe they're doing that. So they get up in the airplane and they're flying along and everybody's getting their chutes on. And Bob puts on a parachute and his son says, what are you doing? He says, how hard can it be? And he jumps out the plane. I mean, his son is thinking, you're going to die, right? And Bob's just laughing the whole way because he knows what he's doing, but his son didn't know. And this is the message of Easter here, that death is working backwards. It looks like you're going to fall to your death, but something better is going on right here. And here's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, if God can conquer the grave, if Jesus can conquer the grave, then don't you think he can conquer whatever issue you're facing right now? Depression, anxiety, parenting, your marriage, your past, your shame, your regret, your worry, your future. Because the promise is that Jesus gave his life for us so he could give his life to us, so he could live his life through us. God has more for you. And that's the promise that's for every single one of us. When you are baptized into Christ, that Spirit of God, the same Spirit that rose Jesus from the dead, can live in you. Now, I know your questions because I had them as well. How in the world is that possible? And how can I believe that to be true? Well, it just so happens that Jesus lived such an extraordinary life that people wrote down the things that he did. And it was verified by all these different eyewitnesses because they watched it as well. And one of the eyewitnesses is a guy by the name of John who wrote down this story of something that Jesus did in somebody else's life to prove to us that Jesus was able to do these things in our lives. Here's how the story goes. And maybe you've heard this before or a version of this before, but I'm telling you, as we read through this story, figure out where you are in the story because all of us show up in this story. And every facet of human existence and our life is found in this story. Here's how it goes. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And so the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, I love the way they say that there. Not, Lord, the one who loves you is sick. Lord, the one who prays all the time is sick. Lord, the one who never swears when he hits his thumb with a hammer is sick. But instead, Lord, the one you love is sick. In other words, God is motivated to help you, not because of your love for him, but because of his love for you. He already loves you, even if you're not ready to love him back yet. Well, here's what happens. So when Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Doesn't that seem strange to you? And let me just ask you this. Have you ever been impatient with God? Have you ever said, God, I'm going to need you to come through for me like in the next 5 minutes? Because they're doing a credit check right now, and if you don't do some magic there, okay, we ain't getting this house, you know? Have you ever just been impatient with God? That's where these sisters are, because they sent word to Jesus, and he has not made his way to them just yet. He stays where he is 2 more days. If you've ever been impatient with God, you're in this story. Jesus stays there a couple more days. Lazarus dies during this time. So then Jesus starts to speak to his disciples, and he says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. Now, he's using metaphors here, but the disciples don't like where this is headed, because the last time they were in this region, they all nearly got killed. People wanted to kill Jesus, and that's going to be anybody near Jesus. They don't want to go back to this region. And so here's what they do. They reply, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. In other words, let's just let him rest. Give him some NyQuil, let him sleep it off, okay? We don't need to go back there because we're all going to get killed. But Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. Now, here's where we are in this story. Have you ever argued with God? God, I don't know why you did that. God, that doesn't make any sense to me. God, why don't we do this? If you've ever done that, even if you don't even believe in God, but you've argued with him, you're in this story. So then Jesus gets really plain with them, and he says, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Have you ever been confused by God? because these guys are looking at him going, are you serious? You're glad that he's dead? If you've ever been confused by God, wondering, God, I don't know why you let this happen, why you did this, you're in this story. But then it continues on. Thomas speaks up and says the thing that everybody's thinking. Well, let us all go. We may die with him. He is the George Costanza of this story, okay? We're all going to die. If you've ever been mad at God or felt despair or felt depression or dread about what might happen next, you're in this story. Jesus starts this journey. He arrives, and Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. He waits 2 days, they start the journey, it's been 4 days. Now here's why this is important. Jews back then believed that the spirit of somebody who died hovered over the body for 3 days. Jesus knows this miracle's about to happen, doesn't want anybody to assume it's just because the spirit was hovering there for 3 days, so he waits 4. He shows up. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. There's a huge funeral going on. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. Get this, but Mary stayed at home. Why is Mary staying at home? Because she's mad at Jesus. Where have you been? Have you ever been mad at God? God, I don't know why you let this happen. God, I'm still mad about the cancer diagnosis. I'm still mad about the marriage that failed. I'm still mad that this has happened in my life. If you've ever felt that, you're in this story. And then Martha starts talking to Jesus. And she says, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And it's almost like Martha cuts him off with, I know he'll rise again at the resurrection, the last day. It's kind of like she interrupts him to say, I know what you're going to say. In the end, we'll all be resurrected and everything will be fine. Have you ever thought you've got God all figured out? For those of you that have been following Jesus for a long time, and you've been in church for a long time, and you've done more Bible studies than you have shelves for, there's a tendency for us just to assume we've got God figured out, and we put him in a little box. And Jesus says, I'm bigger than that. And Martha thinks she knows what Jesus' answer is going to be, but Jesus' answer is so much bigger than that, because this next line redefines Easter. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. In other words, resurrection is an event. It's not a holiday. It's not just on Easter Sunday. It is a person. And he says, you're looking at him. This is the moment that Jesus wants to kind of highlight what's about to happen. And so he uses the word believe 3 different times. He says, the one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And I love what he says, believe. Not the one who prays more, not the one who studies more, not the one who's perfect, but rather the one who just simply puts their trust in me. In other words, you may be impatient. You may be arguing with God. You may be confused by God. You may be disappointed in God. You may think you've got God all figured out. But the bigger question is do you trust him? Do you believe in him? And because of that, Jesus decides to give the proof worth believing. He says, hey, where is Lazarus? And he said, well, he's buried over there. Take me to him. And they all make their way over to the tomb. And then Jesus says, roll that stone away. And they say, oh, now hang on. He's been dead 4 days. He's going to stink, and everybody's here for the funeral. It's going to really ruin the potato salad. We're not going to do that. And Jesus says, no, roll that stone away. And so they do. And then Jesus shouts, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. And at that moment, they might not have had all the answers. They might still be confused, but they now know they can believe in Jesus. And not long after this, Jesus himself goes to the cross and dies and comes out of the grave, the very Spirit of God that raised Jesus from the dead, the one who raised Lazarus from the dead, can live in you and in me. And Jesus says, do you believe this? Because you're not only in this story, more importantly, he's in your story. Do you believe this? So let me ask you this. Take this card out again. Where are you with all this? Be so honest as to mark one of these boxes here in this third question here. Where are you in your spiritual journey? You're already in a relationship with Jesus. You've been following Jesus for a while. Great. Mark that on there. Maybe for you, it's, you know what, I'm beginning on this journey, and I'm beginning to understand Jesus, or at least try to follow Jesus. Mark that. For some of you, it might be, I'm curious about this. I'm not there yet. That's so great, and we're so glad you're here. Journey with us. Spend a year with us. Let us walk you through this together. But some of you might be saying, you know what, I don't think I ever intend to do that. I appreciate your honesty. But I'm going to tell you, you're in a safe place. Skeptics are welcome here. In fact, go ahead and let us know that and just keep coming, because there are people sitting around you that felt that same way a year or 2 years ago, and God just started doing something in their life. You see, for a lot of us, our last year, or maybe your current situation right now is you want that promise to be true, you're just not sure. The truth is, your life feels a lot more like this desert behind me. Your life feels more like it's in the grave right now, and like hope is nowhere around. And you're just wondering, could this possibly be true for you? We all have heard about or seen or gone to or visited Death Valley. And maybe you've gone out there and you've camped out there or whatever. You've had those experiences with Death Valley. And you see Death Valley, and it's dry, it's desert land, and there's nothing living out there. That's why they named it Death Valley. And maybe that's kind of the way your year looks so far this year. Maybe you got a really tough season you've been going through, and it just feels dead. Well, back in 2004, there was a weather pattern shift, and some interesting things began to happen, and Death Valley received 7 inches of rain. And not right away, but slowly over a period of a few weeks and months, and something began to happen in Death Valley, so that by December of 2004, when the rain fell, to Easter of 2005, Death Valley looked a lot different. In fact, flowers were everywhere. And what they discovered was Death Valley wasn't dead, it was just dormant. Beneath the surface, there were seeds waiting to grow. Friends, that's the promise for our lives. And just like Death Valley, maybe we just need a little water. Because what Jesus tells us to do is take that step and be baptized. And when you're baptized into me, the very Spirit that rose me from the dead is going to be in your life and change you from the inside out. So I just want to ask you, have you ever done that? Have you ever decided to make that decision to be baptized? And I know it might seem a little weird. What's the significance of being dunked in water and all of that? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, it was a way to signify something, and Jesus actually did it, and then he told us to do it as well. Much like when you get married, you have a wedding ceremony, or when you graduate, you have a graduation ceremony. This is where you take your faith public and say, I'm in on this. And it symbolizes death, burial, and resurrection, just like what Jesus went through. Now, I know with baptism come all kinds of questions. Some of your questions might be, do I really have to do that to go to heaven? And I'm not telling you baptism saves you. Jesus saves you. But I do have a bit of a pause for anyone that decides to follow Jesus, and one of his commands to us was to be baptized, and we say, I'm not doing that. And I want to ask you, why? Why wouldn't you follow him in everything? Maybe for some of you, your question is, I was baptized as a child or as a baby. Do I need to do that now? And I would say that is so great for you. You should thank your parents for doing that. But wouldn't it be cool for you to do that on your own decision and to go public with your faith by your own, kind of commitment there. And then there's just some real practical questions like, well, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't have a towel. Great question. We have towels for you. We've cornered the market on towels. And we also have t-shirts for you that you can put on whatever you're wearing. And all weekend long, people have just been coming out of the rows and just being baptized as is. Which brings some more practical questions. What will happen with my iPhone X or my lesser Samsung phone? What will I do? Well, we have people that will help watch it, take care of it, and transfer it over after you get out of the tank, right? You're going to be fine. What about my kids? They're in children's ministry. They'll be fine. Leave them there, pick them up next week, whatever. It doesn't matter to us. And yet still, I've actually had this question several times. What if somebody drops me? It's happened. It's okay. We always resurrect you. It will be okay. Now, obviously, we're just having fun here, but I'm telling you, what better weekend to make that decision than Easter weekend. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pray for you, and the band's going to lead us through this really cool video and music moment. And during that time, if you have signed up to be baptized, you can make your way down here and start getting ready for that. But for those of you that think, maybe today, maybe I need to do that today, I want you to come down and join them. And it's going to be a weekend and an Easter like none other for you. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for just your incredible love for us and that you're motivated to help us, not because of our love for you, but because of your love for us. God, I thank you for the many people that have already decided to be baptized this weekend, the many people that have just said, I'm ready to follow you. And I thank you for those that are about to do this, and we celebrate with them, God. We look forward to what you're going to do in their life. And God, I pray for those right now that are on the fence thinking, should I? And I pray you would just give them that kind of spiritual nudge to say, why not? Let's do this together. And God, for those that might have checked, the box of, I'm curious but not sure, or I don't intend to do this, I pray that they would just be overwhelmed by your grace and your love for them in their honesty. So God, I thank you for what you've done and how you have brought refreshment and water to those of us walking through the desert. And God, we see the difference that water can make in Death Valley. Would you just show us that difference in our lives? And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.